Hello again, and welcome back. I think this is the 9th installment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of our in-depth journey through the cards of the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. Just to remind you that it's published by Lo Scarabeo on the 24th of February, 2024. So now we're about to turn a corner, aren't we, and go into the next, because we've got card number 43 is the Mysteries.
Yeah.
Which is the keyword on that is initiation. But following that, we've got actually, I'm just looking. We've got quite a range of gods and goddesses, haven't we?
Yes. After the mysteries, then we do enter the realm of the other gods and spirits that are closely associated with Hecate.
Fabulous. Okay, so let's look at this mysteries card first. Number 43. This is intriguing because it's so simple, and yet this card sums up my own personal approach to divination, because I tend to view the cards as I use them a lot for path working and for visualizations, and I always view the cards as windows or doors that I can step into a particular landscape, and that's completely summed up in this image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where we've got a gateway leading from one world into another. So tell me what your inspiration was for this.
So, I mean, Hecate is linked to a lot of mystery traditions of antiquity. She had involvement in the Eleusinian mysteries, some of the Orphic traditions and the mysteries surrounding those. And those mysteries of old were all only available to those that had been initiated.
Okay.
So it was all quite secret, and most of the surviving evidence is largely speculative, because obviously if you were initiated, you weren't supposed to go writing it down and telling everybody else what you were doing. But there are these tantalizing glimpses of Hecate in mystery traditions, and even in a modern context, there is this sense of an initiation when you first approach the goddess.
Yeah.
And what I loved about the inspiration behind this was I drew from like the High Priestess card in the tarot, with this notion of these pillars and sort of a veil. But obviously we removed the figure so that you had the open doorway, and the veil became much more sheer and gossamer, so that you could actually see beyond it, with this notion of a play between the sort of nighttime cosmic expanse one side, and then this rising dawn over the ocean on the other side. And it was just this really simple and effective way of illustrating these, again, these transitions across a liminal space.
Yeah.
Again, that come under the auspice of Hecate, in all of her many different guises. And yeah, I kind of wanted it to be relatively simple, and I did at one point consider reusing the archway of the Temple of Lagina for it. But obviously, I didn't really want. I didn't want to sort of just reuse a similar image, and so we went for this, staying with the sort of Greco-Roman style, and I think it works as well because it gives this sense of scale.
It does, yeah.
And obviously that is a good indicator, because obviously important initiations in life are grand events. It isn't just necessarily as simple as slipping into another room. Even if it doesn't have all this outward pomp and ceremony, the inward journey can be very dramatic, and often is an upheaval and complete reset of the status quo.
Interestingly, I was talking this afternoon with a friend and tarot colleague about the process of initiation, and I think a lot of people kind of poo-poo the concept of initiation, and the fact that certain societies, certain religious cults, certain certain faiths would kind of operate in under this level of secrecy. But the important thing for me is initiations are there for a good reason. Good, I was talking, as I say, this particular friend and I were talking about the Order of the Golden Dawn, obviously, which Pamela Coleman Smith was a member of, and Arthur Edward Waite. And the Golden Dawn used tarot very much in their rituals, but you had to, I think, I can't remember whether she said it was, I know it was several levels of initiation up the scale before you were even introduced to the tarot. And finally, the penny dropped to me that one of the reasons why so many mystery traditions are veiled in secrecy and there are levels of initiation, it's actually the most effective way of making sure that you're mature enough for the knowledge that you're being given, and that you've attained a level of both spiritual insight and maturity before you're introduced to that next level. And it's particularly when you look at that in the context of this gateway, it makes the gateway even more pertinent, doesn't it? Because it's, it really does raise that question. Do you know what you're stepping into? Are you ready to cross that threshold? Which is a very powerful question in a reading as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I see this as being a case of, if you're approaching this initiation, if you're ready and this is what the goddess is guiding you towards, then you will step through that veil to that other side. But I see that if it's not what you should be doing, you'll walk through that veil, but you'll just come out the other side in the same, environment, because you've not been granted access. And today, the term gatekeeper has got it's become a very loaded term. A lot of, there are a lot of modern sort of practitioners and stuff that, like you say, they poo-poo the idea of this initiation and this learning from elders. They all want to know everything yesterday, but they don't want to do any of the work that goes alongside it. So a lot of them will be running towards this gateway headlong, thinking, well, if I just get across this threshold, that's it, I'll know everything. And it doesn't work that way.
Isn't it interesting, though, the gateway and what you've just described is a very powerful, it's a very powerful feature and symbol that pervades fairy tale and fantasy literature, isn't it? I mean, you see this in the line The Witch in the Wardrobe. When the moment is right for Lucy to pass through into Narnia, she opens the door of the wardrobe and she seems to walk a long way into the dark, and then all of a sudden the fur coats give way to fir trees. But then when Edmund tries to go through the wardrobe initially, he walks in and just hits the back of the wardrobe.
Yeah.
And when she's trying to tell her brothers and sisters that, there is something through there, they too hit the back of the wardrobe until the time is right. And it's a kind of archetype that you see time and time again in fairy tale. But I'd never really thought about the powerful lesson that was behind it, and also, I mean, again, in the Narnia Chronicles, you see that in Prince Caspian, where when Aslan is sending them home, he creates a door out of sticks. He creates a gateway out of sticks, and they're kind of looking through it, and all they can see is, they walk round it, and it just seems to be in the same world. But when they walk through it, they enter that, they come back into their own world. And it's a really powerful notion, isn't it? But again, it brings you back to that, that whole concept of the time being right and you being prepared. It's the other interesting thing you said, that if you go through, you might find that other place, but you personally are still in your old space, and it counts for nothing. I think in situations like that, very often you run right back through the door because,
well, you can try, but often it's a bit too late for that.
So, do you want to move on to the next one?
Yes.
So we're into the pantheon now, aren't we?
Yeah. So we're dealing with gods and goddesses now, and where better place to start than with the Titan goddess Asteria.
So just to clarify, these are all, as you said, these are all gods and goddesses that are associated with Hecate. And
Yeah, or that she has some sort of like direct link to, or that there are certain things that they bring to the overall relationships with Hecate. And obviously Asteria was in most sources is referred to be Hecate's mother.
Oh, okay.
And so she was the titaness of the night sky and shooting stars, and it's basically the cosmic sort of starry night.
Yeah.
And obviously we know from written references that of Asteria, the starry titaness, who is the mother of Hecate, but there's not really any known statuettes, or not really any sort of recorded imagery beyond possibly, I think, a few sort of vase paintings and stuff.
Yeah.
So in one respect, we were kind of limited in where we could go for source material, but in the same respect, we kind of had quite an open. I forget the word, but
we had more possibilities to play with. But I think this really worked because when you first mentioned, of course, we don't have a statue to go by. But then what we were able to do here, I felt we were paying homage to sort of all of the antique constellation maps, where you see the constellations personified either in line drawings or etchings, with the stars superimposed onto them. And it's just a very simple motif, but it works. You really get the sense of her etched into the sky, which is what I love about this card. And also I love the fact that you chose a perspective of literally looking directly up to the zenith, so it's as if you're lying on the ground and staring up through the trees at the zenith of the night sky.
Yeah, and just to see, to coming in, that's probably how Constellation started. People looking at the sky and going, "Oh, that looks a bit like a this, and that looks a bit like a that." And obviously, we've taken the creative license there to just basically
we've created our own constellation, basically.
But in essence, we've kind of, again, it's that Titan-esque scale that I was trying to sort of tap into. And this note, I mean, the key word for this card is dreams. And I chose dreams because obviously, most people, when it's nighttime, they're asleep.
Yes.
And there are sort of references to Hecate's mother and the forms of divination and astrology and things like that. And I just sort of thought, you're thinking of things like shooting stars, making wishes, and it got me sort of thinking along those lines. And the word dreams kept coming up, but again, it's one of those words that has a few different meanings. It can be literal, the dreams we have when we're asleep. It can be, our dreams as in our hopes and aspirations. And, for devotees or followers of Hecate, when we view her as sometimes as the mother of witches, this is the mother of witches.
Interesting.
So, there's and it's one of those things that not everybody either realizes the parentage of Hecate, and certainly not many people probably acknowledge it in their practice. And yet without them, we technically, I mean, I know in later iterations, the parents sort of get mixed and matched as time goes on, because later references say like Zeus is her father, and and so on, and the conflation between other deities kind of muddies the water. But if you take it because basically the first reference to this parentage is from Hesiod's Theogony, so he specifies the genealogy of the gods, and that basically Hecate is the only child of Asteria and the Titan Perseus. And even that in its simplicity, gives this notion that Hecate is quite special.
Yeah.
And then obviously, it goes on to elaborate all of the honors that were piled upon her. And if you go back through the genealogy, for her grandparents as well, she's a granddaughter of the sky and the sea and the earth, and so she's got all of these very primordial inheritances, from her direct ascendants.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of really wanted to sort of pay homage to this lineage of hers, but also to sort of acknowledge the inherent power that Asteria has as a goddess in her own right.
So as a card in a reading, we really are into the realms of dreams, visions, divine inspiration, divine insight.
Yeah.
But also to me, there's very much a subconscious aspect to this as well. If you're in the realm of the night, the realm of sleep, the realm of dreams, it's almost like when divinity kind of touches something in your subconscious and it just bubbles up through your dreams, or that whole thing of divine vision, or where divinity kind of reaches inside you in the depths of sleep and plants a vision there, gives you that that awakening of knowledge that wouldn't have been there otherwise. Is that how you would is that for you what this would describe in a reading?
Oh yeah. And again, it will come down to probably how what draws your attention as well on this card. There are certain little things, like there is the image that you used of like the night sky that we kind of blurred up a little bit. There was a few shooting stars in that, and you can kind of just make out the streaks. So you might get drawn in by that. A seemingly quite insequential aspect, but then there's the connotations of wishing on a star and things like that. But then you might look at the figure of the goddess, so you might look at the stars sort of at the tip of her finger. So is that either a directional thing, or is that the spark of inspiration? Or
stars were always guides, weren't they? I mean, they were always journey guides traditionally.
Yeah, and then sometimes that's about navigating the subconscious, and the things that we're not privy to when we're awake and cognizant with the real world. So yeah, there is. I think there's a lot of layers to this, and I think that's the reason I went with the word dream, because there is so much, so many layers to dreams as a concept, and literally the meanings behind the word.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, number 45. So this was a deity I was not conversant with until you described this card to me. So this is Perseus, and the keyword on this card is destruction. So tell me about him.
So there's even less known and referenced about him than Asteria and some of the other types. It's literally, it comes that he is largely just acknowledged as a titan of destruction, and Hecate is often referred to as the daughter of Perseus, and that's pretty much the main references and such that you get from him. But obviously, I didn't want to not include him in the deck. Certainly not after putting Asteria in, because obviously, again, it's the parents of Hecate. So what I wanted again is war gods and gods of chaos and gods of destruction, they're quite universal across most pantheons. But I didn't want to take an image or a statue of Mars or Ares or something that already existed. And I didn't want to kind of create too much of a definite image about it. But I still wanted to convey that, again, that Titanesque, slightly elevated, slightly more primal power behind the concept of destruction.
Yeah.
And so we kind of played with the silhouette theme, and we've kind of gone with the, this archetypal sort of warrior male with a shield and armor and a spear. And then the background, we kind of dealt with sort of storms, and I think there was like a ruined cityscape that we sort of put in there slightly. So it's
a very turbulent image, and there is this sense of him almost like radiating and spitting fire, isn't there?
Yeah, and the use of the buildings and such as well, it kind of brings it a bit more to the
it's
modern,
out of the natural world, isn't it? It's kind of more into the realm of civilization rather than
and kind of brings into the field of like man-made destruction and our own self-destruction in some respects. And obviously the word destruction is, again, it's a loaded term, and it's one that can be interpreted very negatively, but there are lots of examples of necessary destruction, certainly in nature. As terribly devastating as things like forest fires can be, there are certain plants that require them in order to procreate, to germinate seeds, and things like that. So there's all those notions behind this destruction that as much as it can be difficult, as much as it can be devastating, it can sometimes be a necessary part of life, a necessary part of nature, and not to shy away from it, really. There's that old adage, is the thing about, you can build ivory towers and things, but you can't what's the word, like slings and arrows, but you can't touch God, kind of thing. And it's a similar thing. You can't escape it. You can build a tower as high as you want, until you can see clear sky and clouds, but if it's all gone to pot down below, eventually it's all going to fall down. And I think Persis can kind of bring that, and he can even be invoked to enable that sort of factory reset, or as Eddie Izzard likes to say, the etch a sketch end of the world, where you just sort of go like that, because you've had enough,
take it up and get rid of it. It's interesting though, isn't it? Because there's a lot of tarot tower energy in here. That kind of catastrophic, and you kind of see it reflected in certain tarot designs, not all, but I mean, particularly if you look at, say, the Thoth tarot, the Crowley Thoth painted by Frida Harris, or the sort of various reproductions of the Golden Dawn tarot, where you actually see the lightning is actually emanating from a divine source. I mean, with the Thoth, you kind of see the divine eye, and then the lightning is kind of emanating out of that. And again, so there is this sense of sort of divinely ordained destruction in the tower. I mean, actually, I suppose you do see it in the it's kind of subtly alluded to in the Waitsmith, because the zigzag lightning is actually sort of meant to emulate the sort of path of lightning down the tree of life, isn't it? The Kabbalistic tree of life, which is a divine path. So it kind of fascinates me that it's kind of almost like tower energy personified in a deity here. But what also interests me is the fact that what interesting parentage Hecate has got, because she's the divine child of a god of destruction, a warlike god of destruction, and a benign, almost like a benign goddess of creation and illumination. And again, it puts her in a very liminal space, doesn't it? Is that your
that was my cat knocking stuff off again? one of the many terrors. It is
liminal space, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I very much that they don't seem as though they would make a good pairing.
No.
I mean, and that's before you sort of factor in the notions of male and female role models in ancient cultures.
Yes.
But the fact that these very powerful aspects joined together, and Hecate was born from that. you kind of see, and actually this probably brings us quite nicely onto the next card, because you kind of you'll see how and why possibly Zeus, which is card 46, respected and honored Hecate in quite the way that he did. So card 46 is Zeus, and this is the card that's for honors.
Yeah.
This comes from, again, the earliest literary references of Hesiod, where he literally gives Hecate this really long piece where he basically details, from the moment of a parentage, and then obviously he goes on to her basically helping the Olympians in the Titan War. And then obviously after that, when the Olympians, were victorious, when Zeus was victorious, Zeus didn't, take anything away from her. Whereas a lot of the other Titans were supplanted, or the ones that fought against him were cast into Tartarus. It's said that Zeus didn't take anything from Hecate, and in fact he gave her more honors.
Yeah.
And the more I've kind of thought about this, and the more I read about it and mull it over in my brain, is in one respect you could just say, yeah, he's the new king, and she helped him out, and he's just said, oh, thanks very much. But then when I started thinking about the fact that of maybe, given her parentage and her her lineage, that she's a knower of things, and and a seer of things. So I kind of got this impression that she knew which was the right side to pick, but also she knows that Zeus knows that if he crosses her, he's not going to have a leg to stand on. That sounds a bit hubristic to sort of talk about the gods in that kind of respect, but I do kind of.
I don't think it is at all. I mean, the Greek gods, the Greco-Roman gods, when you look, they are eminently human, and they're case histories of human nature and behavior. But that's what makes these myths so powerful, isn't it? They say a lot to us about who we are as well as who the gods are.
Yeah. And when when it says Zeus let her keep, or didn't take anything away from her, I kind of think, well, yeah, he probably looked at it, and she was probably inaudibly saying, well, try it then, you try and take my dominion from me, and we'll see where we end up. But obviously all of this is conjecture and it's all unspoken, but this is the impressions that I get, that it's not just a case of Zeus being benevolent because she helped him out. It's actually that he recognizes her supreme power and her potential, and actually it's probably better to keep her on his side than it is to actually pee her off.
There's a kind of don't mess with me implication with it, isn't there?
Yeah. And
so sort of in a practical level, I mean, obviously this card deals with the honors that he doled out, but so I mean, presumably on a practical level within a reading, this is very much to do with honors and rewards and respect, presumably.
Yeah. Because especially when we start looking at like mortal issues, and respect is another one of those loaded terms where everybody expects it, but nobody actually wants to do the work to actually garner it,
and to earn it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And where Zeus is concerned, he isn't one that you would really want to trifle with. That sort of big lightning bolt energy, shall we say? Yeah. So it is that case of assessing layers of honor and respect, and maybe even things like duty. Where do your duties lie? Are they are you on the right side of whatever the situation is? But and then you can look at things like, Zeus is a sky god, top of Mount Olympus. His animal is the eagle. So then you've got to look at things. Maybe you've got to look at it from a sort of detached perspective, to see whether the situation warrants the respect, or if you're maybe not living up to the expectations that to get the respect that you require. So yeah, I think on a practical level, once you start digging into the sort of the underside of it, you can kind of it's one of those things that expands out on itself. And again, Zeus is kind of somebody that you can invoke to help that along as well. And especially with the Roman counterpart of Jupiter associated with, especially in magical terms, the I think it's Thursday, and then obviously it's the days that's best for things like business and enterprise. All these things that actually require, I suppose, business acumen and honor and respect, and fair trade and things like that. So
I think there's also a huge amount of empowerment implied in this card as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and interestingly, this initial card, I did have it down for sovereignty.
Oh, okay.
And that was before I actually devised the Anasaphar Makedon card, which then became sovereignty. But yeah, there is still an element of that you could see in this card. Yeah. And obviously, if you got Anasaphar Makedon and Zeus side by side in a reading, there would be a lot more to sort of focus on there regarding probably you getting the recognition and the respect that you require in that situation.
Yeah. Number 47.
Yes.
This is an intriguing figure for me. So this is number 47, Demeter, and the keyword on here is loss. And I think this is one of the most story vivid cards in the deck. This one really does tell a story, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think most of us encounter this, the story of Demeter and the abduction of Persephone somewhere along our childhood. In storybooks, in school, we sort of are mostly quite readily exposed to it, but we're kind of exposed to a very edited and sort of not whitewashed, but it's kind of it's snipped and tipped, and it's made fairly palatable for children. But the actual root of the story in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, there's a lot more going on, and there's a lot more figures in it than generally what you tend to think. Most people don't realise that Hecate had a role in this.
No, I didn't realise.
Even though it's sort of kind of near the beginning and then towards the end, but most of I think it's like the Thomas Taylor Victorian era translations of a lot of the myths. They really sort of not only mistranslated certain things, but they kind of cut out all of the superfluousness and just ran with the main gist of the story. And so, I mean, even when I first started to look into Hecate, I didn't know that she was in the myth until I started to read, older versions.
Yeah.
And so again, having Demeter in the deck is, it's a no-brainer. We've already mentioned about the Eleusinian mysteries and such.
Yeah.
And yet when obviously there's so much that I could have done with this card, and yet we kind of got quite a lot in this card. We kind of got I suppose the fair gist of Demeter's story, and we used some really good images. To be honest, we used a painting.
There was a painting of Demeter sort of basically in mourning for her daughter, wasn't there? And then a statue of the abduction of Persephone.
Yeah,
which you see at the top of the card.
And so the way we kind of did it is it was almost as though the statue of the abduction is almost like a memory, and it's the memory of it. And obviously Demeter is cradling her head in sorrow, and as she's remembering and leaning back into it, because obviously again, this is an annual cycle. This is something that's going to happen time and time again. And that, so as she goes into mourning and into this grief, we've got this sort of hail and ice, and the colour kind of changes.
I love for me, the one thing that I love about this is just the way it personifies the changing of the seasons, which is really what this myth is about, isn't it? With the abduction of Persephone, we move from the sort of fruitfulness of late summer through autumn and then into winter, and then it's a re-emergence from the underworld in the spring, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, even that's a very northern. Well, no, it's not even that. It's a very northern European version of it, because the ancient Greeks and the Mediterranean's version of an annual cycle isn't quite what we imagine these days. With spring and summer and autumn and winter being where they are on our calendar. So their fallow period, their barren time, was actually the height of summer, because it was so hot.
Okay.
It was so dry that they couldn't grow anything.
Right.
Whereas we associate it with winter, and and on all of those. And initially, I seem to remember reading this somewhere. It might have been in Walter Burkitt's Greek Religion. The original sort of ancient Greek seasonal cycle didn't have autumn. They had spring and summer and winter. And they did it was later that sort of this personification of the four seasons came about. But yeah, when we think of this from our point of view, certainly those of us in America and the UK and things like that, when we see Demeter's mourning period, we associate it with winter. So we do associate it with ice and hail, cold, unfruitful earth. So yeah, we kind of played with that, because I think we'd have got bogged down a bit too much in technicality if I'd have gone quite literal with this is how it was for the ancient Greeks, because that would kind of miss the point of what we're trying to.
I think the important thing is the image portrays the myth effectively, doesn't it? And how the fact, in a way, the myth of loss in this within her story is about the cycle of birth, death, and renewal, that we see in the seasons, whatever they are, in different places. It is still a seasonal myth, isn't it?
Yeah, and even the whole keyword of loss, that is sometimes one of those ones where, again, it's painful. Nobody wants to actually experience it, but there are times where losing something, even if it is hard to deal with, is actually part of the better the better course of action for us. Sometimes we have to evaluate what we should give up and what we should allow to go. And the thing is Demeter experiences this loss cyclically, because obviously at the end of the myth, it transpires that Persephone has eaten pomegranate seeds, and so depending on the version of the myth, she has to spend a period of time beneath the earth in the underworld, away from her mother. And so and then it's obviously to reflect that that is then Demeter's mourning period, which is then the barren or winter time, and then she's basically then got to endure until the spring, when Persephone comes back. And obviously Hecate's role in that is that she initially helps Demeter search for Persephone, and then at the end basically becomes like a companion and guide to Persephone between her journeys. And so there's quite a sort of tight-knit, supportive sort of friendship, I suppose, in a roundabout way. And yeah, I just wanted to put that, because obviously we as we'll get onto in a minute, we've got Persephone as well, in
Yes.
the card. So again, it just seemed like a natural addition. But rather than dealing with, obviously Demeter is a goddess of agriculture, of
Mm.
harvest, of abundance. We could have gone down those lines, but I didn't
Both
think.
are implied, but I think focusing on the loss and renewal aspect of her, I think that to me that's the most powerful part of her myth. You know,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah,
And talking of which, moving on to card 48.
yeah,
This is my very, very favorite card in the whole deck, and I think for me, of all the images I've created, it's one of my highlights, one of my all-time favorites of my work. So this is the Core Persephone card,
yeah,
and the keyword on this is growth.
yes. So obviously we've just been talking about Demeter and the growth cycles and the loss and things like that. So but then you factor in Corey Persephone, because obviously before she's abducted, she's known as Kore, this pure maiden,
Right.
this youthful, childlike maiden.
Mm,
And then in some respects, it's seen that when she returns from the underworld, or rather when she goes back to the underworld, she
mm,
becomes Persephone, the queen of the underworld and
yeah.
consort to Hades. And so obviously, I wanted to sort of interpret this diametric, again, cyclical alteration
Mm,
between the two. And I represent it with growth because that's kind of what she represents. When she goes to the underworld, she is the seed being put back in the earth. And then when she
mm.
comes back, she sprouts and she springs.
Sprouts, germinates. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's that's quite a literal interpretation of growth from an agricultural point of view. But then there are these things where we sometimes have to go through, for all intents and purposes, trauma and upheaval and huge life events, and
Mhm.
and stuff that enable us to grow.
Yeah.
And I think the myth of Corey Persephone's abduction, certain sources say the rape of
Mhm.
of those are things that we can we can grow on from. They can ultimately, even the most harshest horrible experiences can
Yeah.
actually help us to grow if we get the right support and the right
Yeah.
either therapies, or we take the time to integrate the whatever happened and to heal
And
ourselves.
ultimately, those experiences change us. I mean, they change the course of, they change who we become. You know,
Mm,
uh, it's I love this card. I love the way you perceived her and the way that you've portrayed her. I love the fact that on one side we have the greenness of spring, we've got the emergent butterfly, we've got, you know, trees laden with blossom, but then on the opposite side of the card, we've got the barrenness of winter. There's a skull there, there's a tree without leaves, but then right at the center, between her dual aspect, you have the pomegranate is central. And when we discuss this, I thought, how on earth are we going to fit all of this in? Because there's lots of subtle details.
mm,
The on the spring side, the texture used is the bark of a tree, isn't it?
yes.
Underlying that, that texture kind of adds to the sort of sense of richness, whereas it's much more austere on the winter side.
Yeah,
uh,
I think we used
I love
like
this image.
I think we used like a sort of rock face.
Yes, that's right, because there's a rock face on one side, and then so it's basically, again, it's like the sort of lifelessness of rock against the sort of the vivid organic nature of the tree texture. And it to me, it was one of the biggest joys to work on and the most satisfying image, but also visually. It
Mm,
just, of all the stuff I've done, I love this image. I love what it represents. And it just gave me a whole new appreciation of her as part of that myth, and also as in her place in the pantheon.
yeah, and I love the fact that we managed to find the stock image of the face. There were it was a series of images, all with the same model. And
Yes.
and then we found obviously the one we used for the core side, but it just seems quite peaceful, quite serene,
Yeah.
and quite youthful. But then this other version where she had this dirt on her face or down her eyes, which could have been, you could view that as tears of through the muck of the underworld as she's been dragged down and things like that. But the fact that her head is ever so slightly elevated, there's a sense of poise and stepping into that role that is, it's a daring role, the queen of the underworld. To go from a little spring chicken running around in the field playing with your friends to suddenly being mistress of this huge, expansive realm, and having this powerful god as your husband. I just loved the ever so slight subtle in the body language that we managed to get that illustrates that this is this growth, this change isn't a bad thing.
No, it's actually a very powerful and positive thing. I think there's a lot of awe-inspiring images in this deck, but this is the one that really personally resonated for me, and it's the one I'm proudest of, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it is definitely one that I don't think either of us quite knew what was going to happen until it was done. And then, like you say, we both sat back and we were like, "Oh my god! Let's just end it there and go and have a glass of wine," and because we're not going to do anything better tonight.
No. But when you look at that, I must admit, when I thought that, it was right when I saw it, when this was finished, right, quit while we're ahead,
Yeah.
And on that note, that's another 6 cards. So
making good progress.
So next time we're going to be covering cards 49 to 54.
Yeah.
So we do hope that you've enjoyed this, and join us next time. We'd love to see you. Take care.